Now in this video, we're going to be working with local storage, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to implement a favorites system here with our restaurants. And basically what we're going to have is we're going to have a button which we can toggle on and off to basically select as favorites, and we're going to be using local storage to basically save those favorites into our local storage. Okay, so let's begin. First things first, what we want to do is we want to create a button. So just to kind of go over the code again, this function here called create card is what actually creates our DOM nodes for us. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna create let's just begin. All right, so we're gonna create a button here. So let's do cons, and we're gonna create a favorites button. So let's call it rest fave. All right, let's do document dot create an element, and let's create a button. All right, so we're gonna create a button. All right, and now where we actually create the data underneath that, let's append to it some text. So let's do rest fave dot append, and let's call it mark favorite. All right, and the reason that is because when initially this is what the button is going to say, and then once we toggle it on and off, we'll change the inner HTML to say something like, unmarked favorite. Okay, and now let's append the text node to the card. Let's do card dot append, and let's do rest fave. All right, so we're going to append it to the card, and then once we do that, so what we're going to need is we're going to need a data attribute to identify each restaurant, because let's look at this for a second. What we want to do is we want to say, okay, when we select this particular restaurant, for example, we wanted to store an object or some data pertaining to this particular card in our local storage, right? So say we click add favorites, we want this specific card to toggle true or false, whether it's true meaning is favorite, false meaning not a favorite. Because say if we weren't associating each restaurant / card with the data that's inside the local storage, what would happen is say we click true on Mission Chinese food, and then what would happen if we click on Emily? Now it would turn to false, right? Because we're toggling one boolean here, and then basically there would be no association, right? So that's what we need, a proper association. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. So let's add another data attribute, and let's do card. Let's just copy this line here. Okay, let's do card.set attribute, and let's give it an ID. And instead of rest name, what we're going to have to do is we're going to need some sort of unique ID, right? Like a unique number. So let's pull in a number. Okay, so because where we're invoking create card is here. Okay, and basically create cards basically when we loop over our JSON data, we have an index for each element of our restaurant. Okay, so we can use this index to our advantage because we're already passing it in, right? We're passing it in here. So what I did is before I even hit play, I put an index here, and I'm passing this index into create card, and basically we're going to use this index as our ID. So we're going to pass it in as a num here, and then what we're going to do is here for each element, because this create card function is gonna run for each element one time. Okay, for each element, okay, it's going to run one time. So for each time it runs, it's going to have its own index, right? So we want to just do num ++. Okay, and that's going to basically, for each element, it's going to give it a unique ID, starting from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 9. Okay, so we have our data attribute that we're going to be using to do an association with local storage. So this is going to be 0, this is going to be 1, and let's look at that for a second. All right, so let's go here. All right, let's save, and we're going to go back here, and let's refresh. Now we should see a button here. Okay, so now if we were to right click on this, let's inspect, and now we can see that for basically for each restaurant we have associated data IDs. Data ID 0 for this one, data ID 1 for this guy, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all the way to 9, which is our last one here. Okay, so we're going to use this to our advantage again. Okay, so let's go back to our console, and matter of fact, let's go back to the code, and let's go down here and create a function called we're going to call it mark favorite. Okay, so let me just scroll down a bit so I have a better line of sight. Okay, so we call it mark favorite. Okay, and let's do const, let's do mark favorite, and we're going to make this a function that's going to take in no parameters just yet. Okay, all right, pull this up a bit. Okay, and now we're gonna need to target our favorites button, which is this guy here, right? So each button here. So we can do const, let's call it fav btm equals document query selector all, and let's do aside, and it should be class card, and child of that should be the button itself. Okay, so that's that, and now we can, let's loop over it. So let's do for each. Okay, and let's take in each button. So for each button, we want to add an event listener to it. So let's do l dot add event listener. Let's give it a click handler. Now let's do functions, and let's take an event. Basically, what event is going to do is we're going to be able to do our event.prevent default, and basically we're going to be able to target the actual button and do some stuff with it. All right, so what we want to do is first let's start by logging out the ID. So let's just do const rest ID, and let's do JSON.string, and I'll explain this in a bit. Stringify, why we're JSON.stringifying it, and we'll do this dot parent node, because we're going to be targeting the actual the actual card, right? Because the data set, the data ID is on the card, not the button. So we're clicking on the button, but we want to target the parent. Okay, so this is referring to the button. Okay, this dot parent node dot data set dot ID, and this is how you access a data attribute on any HTML element. Excuse me, it's dot dataset and then whatever custom ID name whatever dataset name you give it. Okay, now let's just log it here for a second. Let's do rest ID. Okay, so because we're not invoking the function up here, so let's just invoke it. Okay. Taking a second. There we go. 1, 2, 1, 0. And remember, this is logging the index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and blah, 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 all the way to 9. So we know that works. And I guess while we're here, let's just talk about why we made these IDs a string. Because what happens is when you work with local storage, it basically converts everything to a string, including the keys. It basically automatically generates them to strings, and even if you were to set the values as, say, an array or like an object, right, like the actual value of the object key, it would stringify it. So in reverse, you would have to parse that down the road. But that's just to kind of give you a heads up as to why we're doing that. Okay, it's just going to be easier for us to do like a local compare, because we want to do an association between the ID of the restaurant that we click on, and we're going to be setting this ID as the key of the object inside our local storage. So for example, 1 is like 0 would be our key, like a restaurant name key inside the local storage, and the value would be the boolean, like true or false. Okay, and we'll look at that in a few minutes. Okay, so now since we have that, let's just get rid of this guy here, and we're going to need to create a conditional to basically check if the restaurant does not exist, set to true. And the reason we do that is because what's going to happen is initially when we just start the app and the user just comes in, local storage is going to be empty, right? So for the very first time they click on it, we want to check if If there's nothing there, if there's nothing inside local storage, we'll add something to it. Okay, so let's begin. Let's do that. So we can just say if this evaluates the falsy, local storage dot get item, and we can set it to our REST ID. And the reason we want to check for that is we'll get there in a second, because remember I said we're going to be setting our REST ID equals to we're going to make our REST ID represent each card, right? So the restaurant ID for, say, Chinese food would be 0. The restaurant ID for Katz's Deli would be 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So that would be 3. And this would basically be the identifier for that restaurant. Okay, so we just want to check if that doesn't even exist at all. We're going to set it. Okay, so we're going to do local storage dot set item, and this is how you get an item from local storage, by the way. Get local storage dot get item and local storage dot set item. Okay, and we want to set it to the restaurant ID, and we're going to set it to true. Okay, we're going to set it to true, and then we want to do this dot because remember this represents the button itself, so we want to say unmarked favorite. Okay, this is unmarked favorite, and then we want to just do, we're going to add a class list to let's just do this dot class list. We're going to add a class, excuse me, dot add, and we're going to do active. Okay, and while we're doing that, let's go to our CSS, and let's just add a okay, so I added it already. So it's just, it changes the background color to yellow. I added it, in between when before I hit play. And let's just do console.log. Let's log our local storage. Okay, so let's hit save. I'm gonna go back here. All right, and now there's nothing in the local storage, so we're gonna hit mark. Okay, now you see how it added the class, and now it says unmarked favorite. And now our local storage is set to true for the index of 0. So index 0 represents our very first restaurant. Likewise, let's do index number 3, Katz's Deli. 3 is set to true, and same for this guy, blah blah blah. Number 1, index number 1 is set to true. So you can see where we're going with this. Now what we want to do is we want to say, okay, if whatever we select, if the ID of this matches what's in our local storage, we would just want to check. If it's true, set it to false. If it's false, set it to true. Very simple. Okay, so let's do that. Let's just go ahead and refresh this. And what I like to do is I just want to do local storage.clear, and this is just gonna clear out our local storage for us. Okay, I'm just gonna comment that out for now. Okay, so now we checked if it doesn't exist. Now we want to do else. And basically our else is going to be if the REST ID does exist, if it does exist inside local storage, check the boolean. So if it's true, we set it to false. If it's false, we set it to true. Again, okay? I was just checking if it's capital or not. And now what we're going to do is basically, now when we click, we want to basically loop over our local storage, right? And we want to just get the keys, right? Like the 0, the 1, 2, whatever keys are in there, we just want to get those keys. And that's all we're really concerned about. Okay, so let's do it, because that's what we're going to match with whatever restaurant ID we click on, right? Because we're going to compare those two. All right, so let's do object.keys. I'm going to do local storage. All right, we're going to get the keys for everything in local storage. I'm going to do for each. We're going to loop over it. I'm going to take in an element, right? So for each item inside our local storage, we're going to check if rest id dot locale compare, and then we're going to do L. L represents our basically our local storage key. All right, restaurant ID is what we click on, right? And local storage, local compare of L represents our ID, our object key inside our local storage. Okay, if that if those match, right? So if there's a match between those, and local storage dot get item rest ID, okay, equals true, we want to basically set it to false. So we're going to do local storage dot set item. We're going to do rest ID of that particular ID. We'll set it to false. Okay, and then we just got to toggle our inner HTML again. We just do inner HTML equals false. Oh no, not false. We're going to do mark favorite, because we changed it to unmarked favorite when we initially click on it, and now we're just checking, hey, if it's true, then we just want to reset it to false, revert it back to what it originally was. And then we're just going to do this dot class. We're going to remove this class of active dot remove active. Okay, and then let's just do console.log. And we're going to go over the logic just in a second here. Okay, so just to kind of give you an idea, so what we did again, just a summary. Let me just minimize this so you can see the whole thing. Okay, so what we're doing here again is initially when we click on a restaurant, if our local storage item doesn't even exist inside local storage, we add it. Okay, that's all we're doing in here. And now over here, we're saying otherwise, if it does exist, we want to go loop over, we want to take our entire local storage object, right? We want to loop over all the keys, and we're going to basically match the key to whatever we just clicked on, the ID of the card that we just clicked on. Okay, if there's a match between those, and locale compare is a function that allows you, it's a pretty neat function that allows you to do string comparison. If that equals 0, so this means that if it's a match, if that matches, and if it's true, right, if it's set to true, which is what it would be since we did it here the first time, we want to just set it to false again. We want to set our boolean to false for our ID, okay, and we want to change the markup of our button, remove the class, and we're just logging it for now. Okay, and we're going to do an else if, and you know what, let's just jack this here. We want to say if there is a match, okay, but it's false, we want to basically do the opposite of what we did here. Okay, we want to set this to true, set this guy to unmarked favorite, and we want to add this class. Okay, pretty simple. So let's give it a whirl. Let's just clear our local storage. Okay, and I'm gonna comment this guy out again, and now let's do true, false, true, false, and then true, false, true, false, true, 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 false, 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 and false. Okay, so that's pretty simple. That's actually going to be it for this video. In our next video, what we're going to do is, now since we have all this, we just need to reinitialize all of this on local storage load. Okay, and what I mean by that is basically when see how initially we set these buttons to say mark favorite, and we did that inside this create card function here. We created a button and we appended this manually. Well, what we want to do instead is we want to check our local storage and get the value from our local storage, and appropriately set our markup to say appropriately what should go there, whether marked or unmarked favorite. Okay, and that's it for this video, and I hope this helped in getting you set up with local storage. And I hope this helps. If it did, definitely leave a like, smash the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks. Bye.